March 6, 1944. 23,000 feet over Germany. The sky is cold, metal, and violence waiting to happen. Thomas Sullivan sits alone in the tail turret of a B-17 called Hell's Fury, surrounded by plexiglass in the certainty that death is coming for him. Twin 50 caliber machine guns point back toward home, back toward the 6 German fighters closing at 300 yards. The barrels track smoothly, professionally locked onto the lead aircraft's cockpit with perfect precision. Steady, unwavering. Exactly the way loaded guns should look. One problem: Sullivan's guns are completely empty. 2,000 rounds fired. Nothing left but bluff and nerve, and the memory of his brother's voice in a Boston boxing gym. Make them blink first. The German pilot can't know this. He sees those barrels following him through the turn. He remembers the fireballs from 4 minutes ago. He remembers the friends who didn't make it home. His hand trembles on the stick. 300 yards becomes 350. 350 becomes 400. The formation breaks. All 6 fighters peel away from a single bomber that can't hurt them anymore. 27 aircraft total retreat from Hell's Fury that afternoon. Not because Sullivan can still kill them, because they believe he can. This is how one tail gunner changed warfare forever. But the story doesn't start in the sky over Germany. It starts 2 years earlier in a neighborhood where hesitation got you hurt, and the first punch usually meant survival. South Boston winter, 1942. The kind of place where smoke from the fish canneries mixed with coal smoke and salt air to create a smell that meant home to the people who lived there and poverty to everyone else. Narrow streets lined with triple-decker houses, dock workers and seamstresses, and families that measured wealth in whether you ate meat twice a week or just on Sundays. The Sullivan house sat 3 blocks from the waterfront, paint peeling, stairs creaking, radiator hissing like it had opinions about the cold. Inside the kitchen was the only warm room in winter. Catherine Sullivan stood at the stove making coffee before dawn the way she had every morning for 23 years. Strong coffee, Boston style, chicory mixed with whatever beans she could afford. The smell of it filled the kitchen and covered up the smell of damp and struggle and a life built on paychecks that never stretched quite far enough. Her husband James sat at the table back brace, visible under his shirt. 3 years since the loading accident at the fish pier, crushed vertebrae, medical bills that arrived monthly like accusations. He couldn't lift anymore, couldn't work the docks. The injury had taken his livelihood and left him with pain that never quit and compensation that ran out after 18 months. Their oldest son, Patrick, was already awake doing push-ups in the front room. Patty, Golden Gloves boxer, lightweight division. 21 years old and quick enough to make people forget he came from a neighborhood where most fights ended with sirens, not bells. Thomas Sullivan, 19, sat across from his father, drinking the coffee his mother poured. Thinner than Patty, quieter. Working the early shift at Boston Fish Pier, loading trucks with ice and cod, and whatever the boats brought in. The work was brutal. The pay was worse, but it kept the family eating. Catherine poured herself a cup and stood by the stove. Patty's got a fight Saturday. St. Augustine's basement. You going, Tommy? Thomas nodded. He never missed Patty's fights. Not because he loved boxing, because Patty had taught him something the streets couldn't. Timing. The difference between getting hit and making the other guy pull back. James spoke without looking up. Good coffee keeps a man thinking straight. You remember that, Tommy? Clear head means you see what's coming. Thomas wrapped both hands around the cup, feeling the heat. This ritual, this moment, would follow him across an ocean and into the sky. The smell of chicory and bad beans and his mother's hands pouring. The lesson embedded in every sip. Stay sharp, stay ready, think before you move. But when you move, commit. Later that week, Curly's gym, South Boston. The place smelled like sweat and leather and ambition that usually ended in disappointment. Ring in the center. Heavy bags along the walls. Patty in the ring with a sparring partner moving like water, landing combinations that sounded like statements. Thomas sat ringside watching. Patty finished the round and climbed through the ropes, breathing hard but grinning. You see that Tommy Jimmy waited for me to commit. Kept his guard up, played defensive. So I made him think I was going for the body, then took his head. Defense is just fear with a strategy. Thomas looked at the other fighter sitting in his corner, nose bleeding. He's bigger than you. Size doesn't matter if you hit first. You know what kills most fighters? Hesitation. The guy who waits for the perfect shot he's thinking instead of acting. Thinking gets you countered. You want to survive. Make the other guy react to you. Patty sat on the ring apron unwrapping his hands. Same thing on the streets, Tommy. Same thing everywhere. The man who strikes first usually walks away. The man who waits is still waiting when the ambulance comes. Thomas never forgot that. The lesson burned itself into his brain the way important things do when you're 19 and the world feels like it's made of people trying to hurt you. December 7th, 1941, Sunday afternoon. Thomas was loading cod onto a refrigerated truck when someone came running down the pier shouting about Pearl Harbor. The words made no sense at first. Japanese. Bombing. Hawaii. War. By 2:47, the whole pier knew. Men standing in groups smoking, talking in low voices about what it meant. Some were angry. Some were scared. Most were calculating. War meant work. War meant jobs. War meant the Depression might finally end for neighborhoods like South Boston. Thomas didn't calculate. He walked straight off the pier, still wearing his work clothes, and went to the recruiting station on Broadway. The line was already forming, men of every age, some his father's age trying to lie about old injuries, some his age trying to look older. Margaret was waiting outside when he came out 2 hours later. Seamstress, 20 years old, dark hair and hands that were always busy with needle and thread. They'd been courting for 8 months, saving money for a wedding that kept getting postponed because there was never quite enough. She saw his face and knew. You didn't. Every man on that pier is going, Maggie. I'm going first. You don't have to do this. Yeah, I do. He reached for her hand. She pulled it back. Your mother needs you. Your father can't work. Patty's got fights. Who's going to bring money home? The government pays soldiers, Maggie. The government buries them too. Her voice cracked. I don't want to be the girl who gets a telegram. He stepped closer. Then be the girl who gets letters. Be the girl who waits. Be the girl who marries me when I come home. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she slipped something into his coat pocket. St. Christopher medal, silver, worn smooth from her grandmother's fingers, then her mother's, then hers. You come home, Thomas Sullivan. You hear me? You come home. The Army Air Forces wanted him on the ground. Mechanical aptitude, they said. Good with tools. Perfect for aircraft maintenance. Thomas told them no. He wanted gunnery school. The recruiter looked at him like he was stupid. Son, do you know what the casualty rate is for aerial gunners? Tell me. Tail gunners specifically, 38% don't finish their tour, more than 1 in 3. Those are the worst odds in the entire Army Air Forces. Thomas did the math in his head. That's 62% survival. I'll take it. There are safer positions. I didn't join for safe. I joined to fight. Put me in gunnery school. Fort Myers, Florida, January 1943. Gunnery school was heat and repetition and instructors who treated doctrine like scripture. The manual said everything. Wait for fighters to enter the kill zone. Conserve ammunition. Defensive fire only. React to the enemy's attack. Survive long enough for help to arrive. Thomas listened to all of it and disagreed with most of it. The doctrine assumed the bomber was prey and the fighter was predator. It assumed American gunners would always be reacting, never acting. It put all the initiative in enemy hands and called that strategy. During training exercises, Thomas fired early. At ranges, the manual said were wasteful. At angles, the manual said were ineffective. Instructors yelled. He kept doing it. Captain Morrison finally pulled him aside after one exercise where Thomas had burned through 400 rounds on a target at 1,500 yards. Sullivan, you just wasted half your combat load on a target outside effective range. That fighter wasn't even in the kill zone yet. No, sir, but he wasn't comfortable anymore either. He broke formation. That's a win. The manual says, Thomas interrupted. Sir, with respect, the manual was written by men who don't sit in tail turrets. Dead gunners follow manuals. Living ones think. Morrison's face went red. You're one right up away from washing out Sullivan. Then write me up, sir. But tell me this first. If a German fighter is forming up at 2,000 yards getting ready to attack and I can disrupt that formation before he's ready, Why would I wait? Because doctrine gets tail gunners killed, sir. 38% casualty rate. Maybe it's time we tried something different. Morrison stared at him. Then he walked away. That night, Thomas expected dismissal papers. Instead, Colonel Hendricks called him into the office. Sullivan, Captain Morrison wants you washed out. Says you're reckless, undisciplined, a danger to yourself and your crew. Yes, sir. He's probably right. Thomas said nothing. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. But you know what I see? I see a kid who's thinking instead of just obeying. And maybe that's what we need. Men who question doctrine, that's getting them killed. Graduate him, Morrison. Let's see if he survives long enough to prove he's right. Thomas graduated near the top of his class, not for accuracy, for speed, for aggression, for an ability to find targets and engage them before they expected it. The instructors wrote in his file tendency toward reckless initiative, high ammunition consumption, unconventional tactical approach. Someone at command read that and thought Hell's Fury needs a tail gunner. While Thomas Sullivan learned to shoot in Florida, Friedrich Hartmann was learning to kill over France. Hauptmann Fritz Hartmann, 28 years old. Jagdgeschwader 26, 47 confirmed kills. Veteran of the Battle of Britain, the Eastern Front, and now the Western Front, again as the Americans brought their daylight bombing campaign deeper into the Reich. Fritz came from Hamburg, son of a clockmaker. Precision and order built into his bones from childhood. Watching his father assemble movements, tiny gears meshing perfectly, each piece dependent on the others. That's how Fritz saw aerial combat. Precision, coordination, disciplined execution of rehearsed tactics. The Luftwaffe had taught him well. Formation flying, mutual support, echelon attacks on bombers. Lead aircraft draws fire. Wingmen kill the gunner. System, predictability, German discipline defeating American chaos. It worked. Month after month, it worked. American bomber formations bled aircraft. Tail gunners died. The statistics proved German tactics superior. Fritz believed this absolutely. He had to. His world depended on it. Order triumphing over disorder. Discipline defeating improvisation. The rightness of the German cause proven in the burning wreckage of B-17s falling toward French fields. He was married. Anna, 2 years younger, one daughter, Greta, 4 years old. Photos in his cockpit, reminders of what he fought for, a future where his daughter inherited a world of order and precision and German discipline stretching from the Atlantic to the Urals. Before every mission, Fritz performed a ritual. Read Anna's latest letter, look at Greta's photo, drink real German coffee. The coffee was getting harder to find by 1944. Everything was getting harder, but the ritual remained. After each mission, if he survived, he drank coffee again. Wrote Anna a letter, never mentioned the killing, just the certainty, the faith, that Germany would win because Germany deserved to win, because discipline always defeats chaos in the end. His wingman, Lieutenant Klaus Weber, 12 kills, asked him once, Herr Hauptmann, what if the Americans learn? What if they stop being predictable? Fritz had smiled. They won't. Americans are individualists, cowboys. They can't help themselves. They'll keep reacting instead of planning. They'll keep playing defense. And we'll keep killing them. But if they did change, then we'd all be in danger, Klaus. Fortunately, that day will never come. American bomber doctrine is written in stone. They won't change it. They can't. It would require admitting their entire approach is wrong. Klaus had nodded, but something in his eyes suggested doubt. Fritz noticed. He always noticed, but he said nothing. Doubt was a virus. Better to ignore it than give it air to breathe. March 1944. Fritz's Staffel had killed 63 American bombers in the last 4 months. He personally had downed 11. The system worked. German discipline, German precision, German superiority proven daily in the skies over France and Germany. Nothing would change that, Fritz was certain. 300 miles away, Thomas Sullivan arrived in England. The 391st Bomb Group sat at Framlingham under a sky that smelled like rain and fuel and something else. Fear, maybe. Or just the weight of men knowing that some of them wouldn't come home. Rows of B-17s on the hard stands, each one patched and scarred, each one carrying the ghosts of crews who'd flown it before. Thomas walked between them, duffel over his shoulder looking for his assignment. One aircraft drew his attention. Hell's Fury painted on the nose. The paint was fresh. The aircraft wasn't. Flak damage repaired with new aluminum panels. Plexiglass replaced in the nose and tail. Bloodstains scrubbed but not quite removed from the tail turret position. Crew Chief Sergeant Davis was doing maintenance when Thomas approached. "I'm looking for Hell's Fury." Davis looked up. "You found her. You the new tail gunner." "Sullivan, just a sign." Davis climbed down from the wing, wiping his hands on a rag. "You know this aircraft's history, no?" 3 tail gunners in 4 missions. First guy, Bremen Raid, got shot to pieces. Survived but paralyzed. Second guy, 2 missions, transferred out shell-shocked. Couldn't stop shaking. Third guy, Eddie Morrison, lasted 3 missions. Last one, he took hits that missed him by inches. Plexiglass shattered all around him. Tracers through the turret. When we landed, he climbed out, kissed the ground, and asked for immediate transfer. Thomas looked at the tail turret. What did he say? Said the position's cursed. Said the next man dies there. Davis studied Thomas. Nobody's volunteered since. Captain Whitmore has been flying missions with no tail gunner. You know how dangerous that is? How dangerous is flying with a cursed position? Davis almost smiled. You got a sense of humor. You'll need it. Captain James Whitmore called Thomas into the briefing room that afternoon. Pilot, 32 years old, 200 missions, eyes that had seen too much, and a voice that carried the weight of men he'd buried. He didn't waste time. You know the statistics, Sullivan, tail gunner's 38% casualty rate. Yes, sir. You know Hell's Fury's history. 3 gunners, 3 disasters, positions cursed. Yes, sir. And you volunteered anyway. Why? Thomas thought about his brother in the ring, about his father's coffee, about Patty's voice saying, make them blink first. Because everyone else is scared of it, sir. Fear makes you defensive. I'm not here to defend. I'm here to attack. Whitmore studied him for a long moment. You're either insane or exactly what we need. Welcome to Hell's Fury. That night, Thomas unpacked his mother's care package. Boston coffee, chocolate, letters from Margaret, the St. Christopher medal. He made coffee using the crew's hot plate, the smell filling the barracks. Navigator Lieutenant Anderson came over. What is that coffee, Boston style? Smells like dock workers' coffee. My father drank this every morning before his shift at the fish pier. Said it kept him thinking straight. I figure it'll keep me shooting straight. Anderson took a cup, sipped, made a face. That's terrible. Yeah, but it works. The ritual established itself. Before every mission, Thomas made Boston coffee, shared it with the crew. The smell became associated with survival, with luck, with the crazy tail gunner who volunteered for the cursed position and somehow kept coming home. March 2nd, 1944. First combat mission. Target ball-bearing factory Schweinfurt, deep into Germany. The kind of target that pulled fighters out of the sky like blood in the water. Thomas climbed into the tail turret at dawn. Twin 50 caliber machine guns. 2,000 rounds, plexiglass bubble giving him a view of nothing but sky and the certainty that death came from behind. The formation crossed into German airspace at 9:15. At 9:43, the call came over the intercom. Fighters, 6 o'clock high. Thomas swung the guns. 8B F-109s forming attack echelon 2,000 yards back. Perfect formation. Textbook approach. Lead aircraft drawing attention. Wingmen waiting for the American gunner to fixate. This was the moment every tail gunner was trained for. Wait. Track the lead. Conserve ammo. Fire only when they enter the kill zone. Thomas remembered Patty's voice. The man who strikes first usually walks away. He fired at 1,800 yards. Extreme range, outside doctrine. Tracers ripping through empty sky, cutting through the space where the formation was organizing. The effect was immediate. One fighter broke left. Another hesitated. The attack staggered instead of surged. When one fighter finally committed closing fast, Thomas was ready. He fired. Sustained burst. The fighter flew directly into the stream of fire. Engine exploded. Aircraft came apart. Wreckage tumbling toward German fields. Good kill. Someone breathed over the intercom. Thomas was already tracking the next target. 2 more fighters damaged. The rest broke off. The bomber took 0 hits. Post-mission Crew Chief Davis stared at the empty ammunition boxes. You fired 1,400 rounds. That's 70% of your combat load. Whitmore stood nearby, arms crossed. Sullivan, you violated every doctrine in the manual. You fired at extreme range. You engaged before they committed. You burned through ammo like it's unlimited. Yes, sir. You should be court-martialed. Thomas said nothing. Whitmore paused. Then quietly, but for the first time in Hell's Fury's history, we took no tail damage. The Germans broke off before they heard us. Do it again. That night, intelligence debriefed the mission. JG-26 had lost 3 aircraft. 1 confirmed kill by Hell's Fury's tail gunner. 2 probables. But what caught attention was the engagement range. 1,800 yards. Extreme, unprecedented, aggressive. The report went to higher command. Someone wrote in the margin, unconventional but effective. Monitor results. At JG-26's base in France, Lieutenant Weber gave his after-action report to Fritz Hartmann. Herr Hauptmann, something unusual today. 1 American bomber, aggressive tail gunner, fired at extreme range, disrupted our formation before we could coordinate, killed Oberfeldwebel Braun. Fritz looked up from the mission log. Braun is dead. Yes, sir, the American gunner engaged early. We weren't ready. Americans don't engage early. They wait. They react. Are you certain? I saw it, sir. Tracers at 1,800 yards. He wasn't defending, he was attacking. Fritz closed the log. Braun had been his wingman for 2 years. Good pilot, disciplined, followed doctrine perfectly. And an American gunner had killed him by breaking all the rules. Anomaly, Fritz said. Panic fire. Lucky hit. It won't happen again. But Weber's expressions suggested he wasn't sure. It didn't feel like panic, sir. It felt like hunting. Fritz dismissed him, then sat alone thinking. 1 aggressive gunner, 1 lucky kill, nothing to worry about. American doctrine wouldn't change. This was an aberration, a single cowboy breaking the rules. It had to be. Because if it wasn't, if this represented something new, then everything Fritz believed about American predictability was wrong. And that thought was too dangerous to entertain. 2 days later, March 4th, Thomas Sullivan flew his 3rd mission. This time he pushed further. German fighters formed up behind Hell's Fury. Same echelon pattern. Lead aircraft visible. Wingmen holding position. Textbook. Thomas ignored the lead aircraft. Tracked the wingman instead. The predictable one. The one flying straight lines to hold formation. He fired. The wingman exploded. Suddenly the lead fighter was alone. No support, no coordination. He broke off immediately. The entire attack collapsed. Back on the ground, Whitmore pulled Thomas aside. You didn't even shoot at the leader. Didn't need to, sir. Take out the wingman, the leader's got no support. He won't press without backup. They're trained for coordination. Break that, you break the attack. That's not in any manual. I know, sir. Whitmore looked at him for a long moment, then walked away. That night, Thomas sat in the barracks writing letters, 1 to his mother, 1 to Margaret. He didn't mention the combat, didn't describe the killing, just told them about the coffee ritual, about the crew, about coming home. But in his mind, a philosophy was forming. The Germans weren't better. They were just more comfortable. They owned the timing because American gunners let them. Every doctrine said wait. Every rule said react. Every tactic put initiative in enemy hands. What if you took it back? What if you attacked their comfort before they attacked your aircraft? What if you made them react instead of plan? The questions were dangerous, reckless, against everything the Army Air Forces taught. But Thomas had grown up learning something different. In South Boston, on the docks in Patty's boxing ring, the lesson was always the same. The man who strikes first usually walks away. The man who waits is still waiting when the fight's over. Thomas looked at the calendar. March 6th was coming. Major raid, Augsburg, 800 bombers, 2,000 German fighters expected. If his philosophy was going to prove itself, that would be the day. If he was wrong, he'd be dead. And the cursed position would claim another gunner, and nothing would change. But if he was right, if aggression could defeat discipline, if one tail gunner could force the entire Luftwaffe to hesitate, then everything about air combat would have to be rewritten. March 6th, 1944. 2 days away. Thomas made Boston coffee, shared it with the crew. The smell filled the barracks like a promise. Whatever happened, he wouldn't wait for death. He'd go looking for it first. And maybe, just maybe, death would blink. March 5th, 1944. Evening briefing at Framlingham. The room smelled like cigarette smoke and nervous sweat, and the particular tension that came before missions everyone knew would be brutal. Rows of chairs filled with pilots and navigators and bombardiers. Men who'd learned to memorize faces before takeoff just in case those faces didn't come back. The intelligence officer pulled back the curtain covering the wall map. Target slides snapped into place. Augsburg, deep in Germany. Aircraft factory that kept the Luftwaffe flying. The kind of target that would pull every fighter within 200 miles. 800 bombers, the intelligence officer said. Largest daylight raid yet. We're hitting them with everything. Expect resistance. Heavy resistance. Current intelligence estimates more than 2,000 enemy fighters defending the target area. Silence in the room, men doing math in their heads. 800 bombers, 2,000 fighters. Those numbers meant body bags and empty bunks and letters to families that started with, "We regret to inform you." Captain Whitmore finished the standard briefing: weather conditions, flak concentrations, rally points, emergency procedures, all the information that might keep you alive if luck ran your direction. Then the closing, same as always. Stay sharp, stay tight, come home. Chairs scraped, men stood. That's when Thomas Sullivan raised his hand. Whitmore looked at him. Sullivan, permission to speak, sir. The room went quiet. Tail gunners didn't usually speak at briefings. They sat and listened and prepared to die alone at the back of the aircraft while everyone else had company. Go ahead, Sergeant. Sullivan stood. Sir, I request permission to engage enemy fighters before they commit to attack runs, while they're still forming up. Force them to defend before they attack. The silence got heavier. Everyone knew what that meant. Burn ammunition early, violate doctrine, risk running dry when the real fight came. It went against every rule that kept bombers alive. The intelligence officer spoke first. That violates established defensive protocols. You'll be out of ammunition when— I know what it violates, sir. Sullivan's voice stayed level. But 38% of tail gunners don't make it home. We've been playing defense for 2 years. Maybe it's time we stopped waiting to get shot. Whitmore studied him. You'll be dry before we need you. Or I'll prevent the fight altogether, sir. You want to bet your crew's lives on that. I want to bet them on initiative instead of reaction. On making the Germans hesitate instead of letting them dictate when the fight starts. On turning defense into offense before they're ready. The room stayed quiet, other pilots looking at each other, some skeptical, some calculating, some remembering Sullivan's last 2 missions. The bomber that took no tail damage, the fighters that broke off early, the aggressive gunner who'd killed 3 experienced Luftwaffe pilots by shooting when the manual said don't. Whitmore glanced at the intelligence officer, then back at Sullivan. One mission. If this fails, you're off the gun permanently. If it works— he paused. Let the weight settle. If it works, it changes everything. Sullivan nodded. Yes, sir. Sit down, Sergeant. The briefing ended. Men filed out. Navigator Anderson caught Sullivan in the hallway. You just volunteered to either save us all or get us killed. That's the job. No, the job is following doctrine. You just rewrote it. Doctrine gets tail gunners killed, Anderson. I'd rather rewrite it than die following it. March 6, 1944. 0500 hours. Thomas Sullivan woke before the alarm. Habit from the fish pier. Early shift muscle memory that 4 years of different work hadn't erased. He lay in the dark barracks listening to other men breathe and thought about the day coming. 800 bombers. 2,000 fighters. Math that meant chaos and violence, and the kind of odds that turned men into statistics. Some of the faces sleeping in this room wouldn't be here tomorrow night. Question was which ones. And could he change that answer by shooting early? He got up, made coffee, Boston style. The smell filled the barracks and woke half the crew. By the time the alarm sounded, 6 men were drinking from tin cups and not talking about what everyone was thinking. Whitmore came in at 0530, drank the coffee Sullivan poured him, made a face. This tastes like dock workers' breakfast. That's the idea, sir. Keeps you thinking straight. Your father teaches you that every morning before his shift. Same coffee, same thermos. Said clarity came from ritual. Whitmore finished the cup. Then today we'll see if ritual can beat 2,000 fighters. At the same hour, 300 miles away, Friedrich Hartmann was conducting his own briefing. JG-26 operations room, 15 pilots, maps on the walls, and intelligence reports on the table, coffee that was mostly chicory and wishful thinking because real coffee had become memory by 1944. Fritz stood at the front of the room. Hauptmann, leader, man responsible for bringing these pilots home alive while also killing enough Americans to matter. The balance was getting harder. German losses were climbing. Replacement pilots were younger, less trained, more likely to die on their first mission. But today's briefing carried particular weight. Gentlemen, Fritz began, today is the largest American raid yet. 800 bombers targeting Augsburg. Our orders are maximum disruption. Priority targets are Pathfinder aircraft and bombers with aggressive gunners. He paused, pulled out a specific file. Intelligence has identified several high-risk bombers, aircraft whose gunners engage early, disrupt formations, and have demonstrated ability to break our attacks before they develop. He pinned a photograph to the board. B-17, Hell's Fury painted on the nose. 391st Bomb Group. Lieutenant Weber spoke from the back. Herr Hauptmann, that's the bomber from March 2nd, the one that killed Braun. Yes, Fritz kept his voice neutral, professional. This aircraft's tail gunner is extremely aggressive, fires at extreme range, disrupts formation coordination. 3 confirmed kills in 2 missions. Intelligence classifies him as exceptional threat. Another pilot younger nervous, 1 tail gunner. We're prioritizing 1. American of Fritz met his eyes. This gunner is different. He doesn't wait. He doesn't react. He hunts. Braun was an experienced pilot. He followed doctrine perfectly. The American killed him by ignoring doctrine entirely. The room absorbed this. German tactics depended on American predictability, on bomber crews following their manuals, on defensive fire that came too late and conserved ammunition that didn't matter when you were dead. If Americans stopped being predictable, the entire system collapsed. Our primary objective, Fritz continued, is finding Hell's Fury, engaging that tail gunner, eliminating him before he can disrupt other formations. Weber asked the question everyone was thinking. How do we fight someone who breaks all the rules? Fritz had been asking himself the same question for 4 days, since Braun died, since watching formations stagger under fire that came too early from angles that shouldn't have been effective. We use discipline, he said, coordination, multiple attack vectors, overwhelm him with numbers, force him to choose targets, then kill him while he's focused elsewhere. It sounded good, professional, tactical, but Fritz's hand trembled slightly as he poured more coffee, because he'd seen the intelligence reports. Read the engagement summaries. This American tail gunner was doing something no manual prepared them for. He was making fear contagious, making experienced pilots hesitate, making the Luftwaffe react instead of dictate. And if that spread, if other American gunners learned this approach, German fighter tactics would need complete revision. Fritz drank bad coffee and thought about his daughter, 4 years old. Greta, blonde hair and his wife's smile, photo in his cockpit, reason he flew, reason he killed, the future he was fighting to secure. Today he would hunt an American who'd killed his wingman, who'd broken the rules, who represented everything chaotic and undisciplined that German order was supposed to defeat. The briefing ended. Pilots filed out. Klaus Weber lingered. Herr Hauptmann, if this American is as dangerous as intelligence says, why engage him directly? Why not avoid Hell's Fury and focus on easier targets? Fritz considered lying, considered tactical explanations, then told the truth. Because if we don't stop him now, others will learn from him. This isn't about one bomber. This is about preventing a doctrine shift. If American gunners start attacking instead of defending, our casualty rates will become unsustainable. So this is strategic. This is survival, Klaus. Ours and theirs. Someone has to blink first. I intend to make sure it's them. But Fritz's certainty felt thinner than usual. Like faith wearing through at the seams. Like discipline meeting something it couldn't quite contain. 0647. Hell's Fury lifted off from Framlingham. 9 men and 50,000 pounds of bomber climbing through English cloud toward German sky. Thomas Sullivan sat in the tail turret surrounded by plexiglass and machine guns, and the knowledge that today would answer questions he'd been asking since gunnery school. Could aggression defeat discipline? Could initiative break formation? Could one tail gunner force the Luftwaffe to hesitate? 4 hours later, he'd know. One way or another, the formation crossed the channel at 0730, climbed to bombing altitude, 23,000 feet, cold enough to freeze spit, thin enough to make breathing work, high enough that falling meant time to think about dying. At 0919, the call came over the intercom. Fighter 6 o'clock high, Sullivan swung the twin 50s, 12 BF-109s 2,000 yards back, perfect echelon formation, lead aircraft visible, wingmen tucked tight, textbook approach. The kind that had killed hundreds of tail gunners who waited for them to get close before firing. This was the moment. This was where doctrine said wait, let them commit, conserve ammunition. Fire only when they enter the kill zone. Sullivan thought about Paddy in the boxing ring, about his father's coffee ritual, about every lesson learned in a neighborhood where hesitation got you hurt. He pulled the trigger at 1,800 yards. Tracers arced through empty sky, not aiming at aircraft, aiming at the space where formation lived, cutting through the comfort zone where German pilots expected safety. The effect was immediate. One fighter broke left reflexively, another drifted wide. The perfect formation staggered, lost its shape, became 12 individual aircraft trying to reorganize instead of one coordinated killing machine. Whitmore's voice snapped over the intercom. Cease fire, you're wasting ammunition. Sullivan kept his voice calm. Watch, sir. Just watch. The Germans regrouped, but slower now. Cautious. The lead pilot's approach angle had changed. More careful, less confident. The formation tighter, which meant less flexible. Sullivan fired again. Short control bursts, not trying to hit, trying to dominate space, making the sky feel hostile before they even reached firing range. One pilot kept coming, veteran, unshaken, committed to the attack despite the early fire. Sullivan let him close, tracked him, waited until the range dropped below 1,200 yards. Then he opened up. Full sustained burst. The sky exploded with tracers. The German fighter flew straight into the stream. For 1 second, the pilot's face was visible through the canopy. Young, surprised, already dead. The engine burst, metal tore free. Wings separated. The aircraft disintegrated and fell. Clean kill, no question. Good kill, someone breathed over the intercom. Sullivan was already tracking the next target. 11 fighters left. Formation broken. Attack staggered. Some regrouping, some retreating. All of them learning that Hell's Fury's tail position was radioactive. Fritz Hartmann saw it happen from 4,000 yards back. Leading a second wave. Watching the first attack dissolve under fire that came too early and too aggressively. Watching doctrine fail against a tail gunner who refused to follow the script. His radio crackled. Multiple transmissions. Pilots calling warnings. Formation disrupted. Lead aircraft down. Aggressive American gunner confirmed. Fritz keyed his mic. All aircraft reform. Multiple attack vectors. We overwhelm him with numbers. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. This American had just shattered a coordinated attack by firing before the attack existed. Had killed an experienced pilot by attacking his comfort instead of his aircraft. Had proven that initiative could defeat precision. Everything Fritz believed about German tactical superiority was burning in the wreckage falling toward French countryside. The remaining 11 fighters from the first wave regrouped fast. They'd learned. No more neat formations. They split. 6 diving straight down the tail, 5 peeling to 7 o'clock position. Standard counter to aggressive gunner. Divide his attention. Force mistakes, Sullivan keyed his mic. I'm holding 6 o'clock. Waist gunner takes 7. He ignored the threat on his flank entirely, focused only on the direct stern attack. 6 fighters boring in. This was where doctrine said spread your fire. Cover multiple angles. Hope you get lucky. Sullivan concentrated everything on the lead fighter. Fired. The aircraft exploded. Before the wreckage cleared his field of view, he shifted to the next leader. Fired again. Another fireball. Third fighter. Third burst. Aircraft trailing smoke, braking hard right. Pilot fighting for control he'd already lost. 30 seconds. 3 fighters down or critically damaged. The remaining 3 broke, not repositioning, not regrouping, running. Pure survival instinct overriding training and orders and everything they'd been taught about pressing the attack. Whitmore's voice over the intercom barely controlled. They're disengaging. Sullivan checked his ammunition counter. 1,200 rounds gone, 800 remaining. Math that would matter soon. The waist gunner got one of the 7 o'clock attackers. The rest fled. 13 fighters total had attacked Hell's Fury. 6 were dead or dying, 7 were running. 0 hits on the bomber. The impossible math of aggression defeating discipline. 15 minutes of relative quiet. The formation pressed toward Augsburg. Engines droning, nerves stretched. Below them, Germany. Above them, empty sky that wouldn't stay empty. Radar operator's voice tight with tension. Multiple new contacts. Count, 18 fighters. No, wait, 36. Sir, we have 36 new fighters inbound. The Germans that survived weren't coming back screaming. They were calling reinforcements, bringing overwhelming numbers, learning from failure and adapting. Sullivan did the math. 800 rounds left, 36 fighters plus the 6 still shadowing, 42 total, less than 20 rounds per aircraft if he was perfect. He wouldn't be perfect? More contacts, the radar operator said. Sir, total count is now 48 fighters. Whitmore's voice carried the weight of command facing mathematics that didn't care about courage. We can't take that many, Sullivan. Nearest friendly formation is 3 miles away. We're alone. Sullivan looked at his ammunition counter. 380 rounds after the last burst. 48 fighters. The math was ugly and getting worse. Permission to try something, sir. What? Those fighters are still organizing. If we wait, they hit us from every angle at once. We won't survive that. But if I engage now while they're forming up, maybe I can break them before they're ready. Silence on the intercom, every man doing the same calculation. Engage early and risk running dry. Wait and die under coordinated assault. No good options. Just different ways to gamble with lives. You'll be out of ammo in half a minute, Whitmore said. Then it has to count, sir. 3 seconds of silence. Then do it. Sullivan opened fire at 2,000 yards. Not bursts, not warnings. Sustained barrage aimed at the center of the forming mass. Not targeting individual planes, targeting the organization itself. The coordination, the discipline that held 48 aircraft together. Tracers ripped through the space where order lived. 1 fighter caught fire. 2 others collided trying to evade. The rest scattered. 48 aircraft dissolving into chaos. No attack plan, no coordination. Just individual pilots trying to survive unexpected aggression. Sullivan stopped firing. Checked ammunition. 290 rounds left. The Germans would regroup. They always did. But he'd bought time, bought disruption, bought the slim chance that fear might do what firepower couldn't. 90 seconds later, the Germans came back. Angrier now, faster, uncoordinated, discipline gone, replaced with rage and the desire to kill the tail gunner who'd made them look like beginners. 12 fighters swarmed straight down the tail. No formation, no plan, just violence and velocity and the certainty that numbers would prevail. Sullivan fired into the center of the pack. Burst, burst, burst. Aircraft exploded. Others broke off, trailing smoke. Cannon fire flashed past his turret. Metal screamed. The bomber shuddered under hits. He kept firing. 200 yards, 100 yards. Muzzle flashes visible. Faces in cockpits. Range where missing was harder than hitting. Then silence. The awful mechanical silence of guns that had nothing left to give. Sullivan keyed his mic. Voice steady despite hands that wanted to shake. I'm out. Dry on all guns. The intercom went quiet. Every man processing what that meant. The tail position defenseless. Hell's Fury wounded and alone with fighters still coming. Whitmore say again, no ammunition remaining, sir, and they're still coming. Fritz Hartmann heard the radio chatter. Intercepted transmissions. American tail gunner out of ammunition. Intelligence confirmed. Barrel flashes stopped. Target is defenseless. This was the moment. This was where German discipline triumphed. Where coordination and numbers crushed individual courage. where the natural order reasserted itself. Fritz keyed his radio. All aircraft tail guns are silent. Attack 6 o'clock, low. Finish this. 6 fighters formed up. Calm now, professional. No more chaos, just execution. They had the American gunner exactly where doctrine said he'd end up. Out of ammunition, out of options, waiting to die. Fritz flew wingman position, 300 yards back, watching his lead pilot track toward that bomber. Watching those tail guns that should be harmless now. Watching and remembering 21 aircraft lost. Remembering brawn. Remembering formations dissolving under fire that came too early. The lead fighter closed. 400 yards. 300. 250. And those tail guns started moving. Traversing smoothly. Tracking. Locked onto the lead aircraft with perfect precision. Barrels following the fighter through every movement. Steady. Professional. Exactly how loaded guns looked when they were about to fire. Sullivan's hands were shaking, adrenaline crash hitting hard now. 4 hours of sustained combat, 2,000 rounds fired. Nothing left but bluff in the memory of Patty's voice in a Boston gym. Make them blink first. He traversed the guns, smooth, deliberate. Tracked the lead fighter with perfect precision, no hesitation, no shaking visible in the gun mounts. Just certainty. Professional threat. The appearance of capability. The German pilot saw it, saw those barrels following him, remembered the fireballs, remembered friends burning, remembered 4 minutes of American aggression that shattered every assumption about how bomber crews fought. Instinct took over before logic could intervene. The pilot broke right, hard. Emergency evasion from a threat that didn't exist. The formation followed. 6 aircraft peeling away. Then 12 more seeing them retreat. Then the rest. 27 fighters total turning away from one bomber that couldn't hurt them. Not because Sullivan could kill them. Because they believed he could. Because memory filled empty guns. Because fear did the work ammunition couldn't. They're breaking off, someone whispered over the intercom. They're actually breaking off. Sullivan watched them go, hands shaking visibly now, vision blurring. The bluff had worked. The impossible gamble. The psychological warfare that turned empty barrels into weapons more effective than bullets. Hell's Fury flew on alone. Wounded. 47 bullet holes they'd count later. 13 cannon strikes. Every round Sullivan carried gone. But alive. Improbably, impossibly alive. Augsburg appeared ahead. The target. The reason 800 bombers crossed Germany. The bombs fell. The mission completed. And somewhere behind them, German pilots were learning that fear didn't care about ammunition counts. Fritz Hartmann flew back toward France in formation with survivors and ghosts. His wingman had retreated from empty guns. His Staffel had lost half its strength. And an American dock worker's son with boxing lessons had just proven that courage could shatter discipline. Everything Fritz believed about warfare had died in the last 4 minutes. Killed by a tail gunner who refused to wait, who attacked comfort instead of aircraft. Who won the final engagement by making experienced pilots too afraid to press an attack they should have completed. The debrief would be brutal. The numbers worse. 21 Luftwaffe aircraft lost, most to one bomber, one gunner, one American who'd learned something German training didn't account for. That initiative mattered more than coordination. That aggression could defeat precision. That one man's will could break a formation's discipline. Fritz's daughter would not inherit the world he'd promised her. German order had not triumphed. An American had won by refusing to be predictable. And the lesson burned like shrapnel Fritz would carry for the rest of his life. Hell's Fury touched down at Framlingham at 1347. The crew climbed out on legs that barely worked. Ground crew swarmed, counting damage, assessing holes, calling numbers that shouldn't equal survival. And in the tail turret, Thomas Sullivan sat alone, hands still shaking, mind still processing. He'd fired 2,000 rounds, killed 12 fighters, bluffed 27 more, changed aerial combat doctrine in 4 minutes. But all he could think about was Patty's voice, his father's coffee, Margaret waiting in Boston, and the certainty that he'd done what needed doing, even though the cost was measured in German lives and his own nightmares. The war wasn't over. More missions waited. More fighters would come. But March 6, 1944 had proven something no manual taught. Sometimes survival doesn't come from firepower. Sometimes it comes from making the enemy too scared to pull the trigger. And sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the sky is the will of one man who refuses to wait for death. 250 yards, the distance between life and death measured in seconds that stretched like hours. Thomas Sullivan's hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting hard, but the twin 50 caliber barrels stayed steady in their mounts. Perfect, professional. Tracking the lead German fighter with the kind of precision that came from 2,000 rounds of practice and 4 minutes of learning that survival belonged to the man who made the enemy believe. The barrels followed the BF-109 through its approach. Smooth traverse, no hesitation, exactly how loaded guns looked when they were about to kill you. Friedrich Hartmann flew wingman position 300 yards back, watching his pilot track toward that bomber, watching those tail guns track back. His hand trembled on the throttle. Everything he'd learned in 6 years of combat said press the attack. The American was out of ammunition. Intelligence had confirmed it. Barrel flashes had stopped 90 seconds ago. This was physics and mathematics and the certain victory of discipline over chaos. But Fritz's mind kept replaying the last 4 minutes. The formations dissolving. The fireballs. The 21 aircraft lost. The pilots who'd believed they were safe and died believing it. His internal voice cold and analytical, like his father's voice explaining clockwork. He's out of ammunition. The numbers prove it. 2,000 rounds maximum capacity. We counted the barrel flashes. He fired everything. This is a bluff. Press the attack. Discipline defeats fear. But another voice quieter, newer, dangerous. What if he saved one burst? What if he's been counting two? What if this American is different from every other gunner we've faced? Fritz watched his lead pilot drift slightly. Just a fraction. Uncertainty in the flight path. The same uncertainty Fritz felt crawling up his spine like ice. 200 yards now, close enough to see the American gunner's silhouette in the tail turret. Close enough to see those barrels locked on target. Close enough to dis if he was wrong about the ammunition. Fritz thought about Anna, about Greta, about the letter in his cockpit pocket promising his daughter would inherit a world where German discipline triumphed. About all the certainties he'd built his life on shattering in 4 minutes of American aggression that the manual said was impossible. His lead pilot's aircraft drifted wider, the formation loosening. Fear was contagious. Once it started, it spread faster than fire. Fritz made a decision, not based on training, not based on orders, based on the primal calculation that every pilot made when courage and survival went to war in their chest. He broke right, hard, not a tactical repositioning, a retreat. His wingman followed instantly, then the others. 6 aircraft peeling away from one bomber, then 12 more seeing them go, then the rest. 27 fighters total abandoning an attack run they should have pressed. Fleeing from empty guns in a bluff so perfect, it rewrote the mathematics of aerial combat. Sullivan watched them go, hand finally shaking visibly now, breathing hard, the adrenaline that had kept him steady evaporating into something close to shock. Whitmore's voice over the intercom barely controlled. They're breaking off. They're actually breaking off. Navigator Anderson. I don't believe it. Waste gunner. He bluffed them off them. With empty guns. He bluffed the whole damn Luftwaffe. Sullivan keyed his mic voice steadier than his hands. Patty was right. Make them blink first. Hell's Fury flew on alone through hostile skimmed, wounded. 47 bullet holes they'd count later. 13 cannon strikes. Every round Sullivan had carried fired and gone, but the crew was alive. The bomber was flying, and somewhere behind them, German pilots were learning that fear didn't care about ammunition counts. Fritz Hartmann flew back toward France in formation with ghosts. 6 aircraft from his Staffel had taken off that morning. 3 were returning, half his strength gone. Braun dead days ago, Richter and Vogel burning over Germany. And for what one American bomber that had beaten them with psychology instead of firepower. The math was brutal. 21 Luftwaffe aircraft lost that day. Most of them to one tail gunner who'd learned something no German training accounted for. That aggression could shatter discipline. That initiative could defeat precision. That one man's will could break a formation's coordination. Fritz's hands were steady on the controls, but his mind was chaos. Everything he'd believed about air combat, about German superiority, about discipline triumphing over disorder, had died in the sky over Augsburg, killed by an American who fired too early and too often and made it work through sheer refusal to play defense. Back at base, the debriefing was quiet. Officers asked questions. Pilots gave answers. The numbers went into logs that would be analyzed by men who weren't there and wouldn't understand. Klaus Weber, one of the survivors, spoke carefully. Herr Hauptmann, that American gunner, he changed everything. Fired at ranges we thought were safe. Disrupted formations before we could coordinate. And at the end, when he had no ammunition, he made us retreat anyway. How the intelligence officer asking. Fritz answered, voice flat. He made us believe he could still kill us. We'd seen what he could do. We'd lost friends. When those guns tracked us, we remembered. Memory did the work of ammunition. The intelligence officer wrote notes, then looked up. We're marking certain American bombers as extreme risk, avoiding engagement where possible. This bomber Hell's Fury is on the list. Fritz said nothing, but inside something fundamental had shifted. His daughter would not inherit the world he'd promised her. German discipline had not triumphed. An American dockworker's son with borrowed tactics from a boxing gym had proven that courage could defeat order. The thought should have filled him with despair. Instead, it filled him with something stranger. Curiosity, respect. The beginning of a question that would take 23 years to ask. Who was that gunner? And what could I learn from him? Hell's Fury touched down at Framlingham at 1347. The right landing gear held despite the damage. The engines coughed but didn't quit. The crew climbed out on legs that barely worked, minds still processing survival. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft immediately, counting holes, assessing damage, calling out numbers that shouldn't have added up to a flying airplane. 47 bullet holes, 13 cannon strikes, port aileron half gone, rudder shredded, number 3 engine running on hope, and the tail turret looked like someone had tried to open it with a can opener made of high explosive. Thomas Sullivan crawled out last, legs shaking, vision blurry, hands cramping from 4 hours of gripping control yokes that weren't designed for sustained combat. Crew Chief Davis was waiting. Empty ammo boxes, all of them. Every single round counted. Thomas's voice came out hoarse. Davis looked at the damage, looked at the empty boxes, looked at Sullivan. 12 confirmed kills, 4 probables, 3 damaged. And you bluffed them at the end. Didn't have a choice. Made them think I did. Whitmore came over flight jacket stained with hydraulic fluid and someone else's blood from a shrapnel wound that hadn't been mentioned on the intercom. He looked at Sullivan for a long moment, then spoke quietly. What you did up there, that wasn't in any manual. That wasn't doctrine. That was instinct and courage and something nobody's taught yet. Just South Boston rules, sir. Strike first. Make them react. Whitmore nodded. Headquarters wants a full debrief. Tonight. You just rewrote air combat doctrine in 4 minutes. They're going to want to know how. The debriefing lasted 3 hours. Officers asking questions. Sullivan answering, describing the philosophy, the early engagement, the focus on disruption over kills, the bluff. Every detail recorded and analyzed and filed for men who would turn it into training programs. By nightfall, crews from 3 bomb groups were talking about it. The tail gunner who didn't wait, who turned the most vulnerable position into a weapon, who saved his crew by making the enemy too scared to pull the trigger. By morning, pilots were requesting Sullivan train their gunners. By afternoon, intelligence was analyzing his tactics. By the next week, casualty statistics were starting to shift in ways that made commanders pay attention. 1 bomber, 1 mission, 1 gunner refusing to play defense. And the mathematics of aerial combat began changing. Within 2 weeks, tail gunner casualties dropped 23%. German fighter attack completion rates fell 34%. Bombers started coming home with empty ammo boxes and intact crews. The correlation was too strong to ignore. Sullivan's aggressive defense tactics, the memo said. Fundamental shift in air combat philosophy. Recommend immediate dissemination to all gunner training programs. Thomas didn't celebrate. He cleaned his guns, checked the mounts, made Boston coffee for the crew. Did what he'd always done, but the impact was spreading faster than he could track. Other gunners started firing early, started disrupting formations, started attacking enemy comfort instead of waiting for enemy attacks. Some did it well, some wasted ammunition, but enough succeeded that German pilots started breaking off at the first tracer. Fear had changed sides. April 1944. Orders came through. Sergeant Sullivan reassigned from combat to training duty, effective immediately. Thomas reported to Whitmore's office. "Sir, I'd rather fly." Whitmore looked up from paperwork. "You'll save more lives teaching than shooting. We've got 300 new gunners coming through every month. Most of them trained on doctrine that gets them killed. You can change that." The teaching assignment lasted 4 months. Spring and summer of 1944. Thomas stood in front of classes full of kids who looked younger than him, teaching lessons no manual covered. Psychology of initiative. Firing at extreme range to disrupt formation. Attacking wingmen first. Making the enemy react instead of plan. Breaking their comfort before they broke your aircraft. Not everyone approved. Old school instructors called it reckless. Ammunition officers complained about consumption rates. Some crews thought it was luck dressed as courage. But the statistics kept improving. Men who learned it survived. Men who mastered it came home. Families stayed intact. And German pilots started avoiding certain bombers entirely. Radio intercepts confirmed it. Luftwaffe warnings about aggressive American gunners. Tactical briefings advising pilots to break off if tail guns fired early. Certain aircraft marked as extreme risk. Fritz Hartmann received those briefings, read the warnings, saw hell's fury on the avoid list, and remembered the day his certainty died. May 8, 1945. The war in Europe ended without ceremony. No dramatic last battle. Just orders to cease fire and return to base. Men who'd been trying to kill each other yesterday became statistics today. Numbers in logs, names in files, memories that would fade slower than shrapnel scars. Thomas Sullivan came home to South Boston in June. Discharged. War over. Resumed normal life as if the last 3 years had been an interruption instead of a transformation. Margaret met him at the train station. 3 years older, still beautiful, still patient, still waiting like she'd promised. They married a week later. Small ceremony. St. Augustine's Church. Reception in the parish hall with coffee and cake, and dock workers who'd known Thomas since he was born. No mention of the war, no talk of kills or tactics or empty guns, just a neighborhood welcoming home one of their own. Thomas went back to work. Sullivan and Sons Construction. His father's company, though his father couldn't work anymore. Thomas carried lumber, poured concrete, ran crews, same neighborhood, same streets, same people. When reporters found him in 1947 asking about his role in changing Air Force doctrine, his response was always the same. "I did what needed doing, so did a lot of other men. They wanted details. He gave none. They wanted to make him a hero. He refused. Eventually they stopped asking. But the men he'd trained remembered. The gunners who lived because they learned to act instead of wait. They sent letters sometimes, thanking him, telling him about families they got to raise because someone taught them that fear shrinks when you move first. Thomas kept the letters in a box in the basement and never read them twice. Margaret understood. Some men carried the war in their minds. Thomas carried it in silence. Across the Atlantic, Friedrich Hartmann was building a different kind of life from similar ruins. Hamburg, 1945. The city was rubble. The Luftwaffe was history. Germany was defeated and occupied and learning to live with shame. Fritz came home to Anna and Greta in a city that barely resembled the one he'd left. His father's clock shop was gone, bombed in 1943. His mother had died in the same raid. Everything he'd fought to preserve had been destroyed anyway. The world his daughter inherited wasn't order and precision. It was chaos and reconstruction, and the hard lesson that discipline without wisdom was just organized failure. "What will you do?" Anna asked him. "I don't know. Everything I believed was wrong." It took him a year to find purpose. 1946, civilian flight instructor, teaching at a rebuilt Hamburg flight school, taking boys who'd been too young for the war and teaching them to fly without teaching them to hate. But something had changed in Fritz's approach. His students noticed it. He didn't just teach precision and formation and discipline. He taught an initiative, aggression, the importance of acting instead of reacting. One student asked Herr Hartmann, "Isn't that American doctrine?" Fritz paused, then answered honestly, "Yes, I learned it from an American who beat me, and it works better than what we taught." Over the years, the story came out in pieces. The tail gunner, who fired early, the formations that dissolved, the bluff with empty guns. Fritz didn't glorify it. didn't make it heroic, just presented it as tactical fact. This works. This saves lives. Learn from it. By the 1950s, Fritz was teaching Sullivan's tactics to German pilots without knowing Sullivan's name. The doctrine had spread that far. Aggressive defense, initiative over reaction, making the enemy hesitate before they attacked. Fritz kept searching. Air Force historical records, American veteran organizations, trying to find the gunner from March 6, 1944. The man who changed his life by destroying his certainties. He wrote letters to the U.S. Air Force. Most went unanswered. Some were forwarded. None reached from Sullivan. Margaret intercepted them, threw them away, protecting her husband from memories he'd buried in silence and construction work. Fritz never stopped looking because he needed to say something, needed to acknowledge a debt, needed to ask a question that had lived in his mind for 23 years. How did you know? How did you have the courage to break every rule when rules were all we had? October 1967, South Boston construction site. Foundation work for a new warehouse near the old fish pier. Thomas Sullivan, 44 years old, running a crew of 8, pouring concrete, checking levels, doing the same work his father had done before the injury. Coffee break, 10:15. Same Boston coffee from the same kind of thermos his mother had packed in 1942. The smell still meant clarity, still meant thinking straight. One of the younger workers came over. "Tom, there's a man asking for you. Tell him I'm busy. He says he flew against you." March 1944. Thomas stopped. The coffee in his hands suddenly tasted like memory. 23 years dissolved. He was 19 again, sitting in a tail turret, making life and death decisions with borrowed philosophy and his brother's boxing lessons. Where by the fence, Thomas walked over. German man, late 50s, gray suit, nervous hands, holding something, a photograph. Thomas Sullivan. The accent was thick, but the English was careful. "Yeah, who's asking?" "My name is Friedrich Hartmann. Hauptmann, Jagdgeschwader 26. The man paused. "I was one of the fighters you bluffed." March 6, 1944. Thomas stared at him. 23 years of silence. 23 years of not talking about it. And now the war was standing at his construction site wearing a gray suit and holding a photo of a little girl. "You came all the way from Germany to tell me that Fritz met his eyes. I came to tell you that you changed my life." Thomas didn't know what to say. Finally, there's a trailer. Coffee's bad, but it's hot. They sat across from each other in the construction trailer. Thomas poured 2 cups from the thermos. Fritz took 1 sip, and something in his expression shifted. "Boston to coffee. How'd you know I've been studying you for 20 years? Read everything. Your hometown, your background, dock worker's son. I thought the coffee might be tradition." Thomas said nothing. Fritz set down the cup carefully. "I have thought about that day every week since it happened, and you were out of ammunition. We knew it. Intelligence confirmed it. But your guns tracked me perfectly. And I broke off. I flew away from a defenseless bomber because you made me believe you could still kill me. That was the idea. You won without firing a shot." Fritz's voice carried something between admiration and pain. 21 aircraft lost that day, 6 from my Staffel, all because one American gunner refused to wait for us to dictate the fight. Thomas looked at the photograph Fritz had set on the table. Little girl, 4 years old maybe, brown hair, smiling. "Your daughter Greta. She was 4 when you bluffed me. If I had pressed that attack, if I had trusted my training over my fear, she would have grown up without a father." Silence filled the trailer. Outside, concrete trucks rumbled. Workers shouted. Normal life continuing, while 2 men who tried to kill each other sat drinking coffee and processing survival. After the war, Fritz continued quietly. "I became flight instructor, teaching young German pilots, teaching them to fight Americans numb, teaching them your tactics." Thomas looked up sharply. Fritz nodded. "Aggression defeats patience. Initiative defeats reaction. Courage defeats discipline. I teach them the lessons you taught me at 23,000 feet. Every pilot I trained in the last 20 years learned from an American tail gunner named Thomas Sullivan." Why? "Because you were right, and I was wrong. My Luftwaffe believed in precision, formation, discipline. We thought order would triumph. You showed us that one man's will can shatter 100 men's plans." Thomas said nothing. "What do you say to that? What do you say to a man who tried to kill you and ended up learning from you?" Fritz pulled out another photograph. Older now, woman in her 20s, teacher Fritz said. My daughter. She teaches children in Hamburg that war is waste, that courage is precious, that Americans saved Europe not with firepower, but with will. I taught her that, because you taught me. The coffee had gone cold. Thomas poured fresh cups. The ritual automatic. Comforting. My father drank this every morning before his shift at the fish pier. Said it kept him thinking straight. My brother said it kept him sharp in the boxing ring. I drank it before every mission. Fritz sipped. American coffee will always taste like defeat to me, but also like survival, like learning, like the day I stopped believing discipline was enough. Why did you really come here? Fritz met his eyes. To apologize. For believing you were the enemy. For teaching my daughter that German order was supreme. For not recognizing courage when it stared me down from empty barrels. He slid the photograph of adult Greta across the table. She teaches that war is failure, that people matter more than nations, that an American dock worker's son with boxing lessons changed warfare by refusing to be predictable. You taught her that. You taught me, March 6, 1944. Took me 23 years to understand it. They sat in silence. Then Thomas spoke. How many men did I kill that day? 21 confirmed. And how many did you save by teaching them not to be predictable? Fritz considered. 7 students last year alone who didn't die because I taught them your doctrine. Dozens over 20 years. Maybe hundreds if you count their students. Then we're even. Fritz shook his head. We're not. Your legacy crosses borders. German pilots fly safer because an American tail gunner refused to wait. That's bigger than kills. That's transformation. Outside, the foreman called for Thomas. Breaks over, the real world intruding. Thomas stood. Fritz stood with him. If you ever come to Hamburg, Fritz said, my home is yours. If you ever come back to Boston, I'll make you real coffee. Fritz smiled. American coffee will always taste like victory to me now. Bitter victory, but victory. They shook hands, firm, equal. 2 men who tried to kill each other, learning that respect sometimes grew from violence and understanding sometimes needed 23 years. Fritz left. Thomas watched him go, then returned to the construction site, poured concrete, checked levels, said nothing to the crew about the German who'd come to apologize for surviving. That night he told Margaret, all of it, the conversation, the apology, the revelation that his tactics had spread to German flight schools. She listened, then asked, how do you feel? I don't know. Proud maybe, sad, relieved that he made it home to his daughter. Are you going to write him? No. What we needed to say, we said, but he kept Fritz's address, kept Greta's photo, added them to the box in the basement with the letters from the gunners he trained, evidence that March 6, 1944 had mattered more than he'd let himself believe. The years passed. Thomas Sullivan kept working construction, raised no children. Margaret couldn't after a miscarriage in 1948. They filled their lives with work and church in the neighborhood that had shaped him. He never talked about the war publicly, never sought recognition. When the Air Force tried to give him medals in the 1970s, he declined. When historians asked for interviews in the 1980s, he refused. When a documentary crew wanted to film him in 1995, he shut the door. I did what needed doing, so did a lot of other men. That was always his answer, always final, always true. 1998, age 75. Thomas Sullivan died the way he'd lived, working. Heart attack on a construction site in South Boston, pouring foundation for a building that would outlast him. He dropped the level, sat down, and was gone before the ambulance arrived. Funeral was small, family, old friends, no honor guard, no salute. Just another working man from South Boston laid to rest in the same cemetery as his father and brother. Margaret gave the eulogy, short, honest. Tom never talked about the war, never mentioned the medals they tried to give him, never counted the men he saved. He just came home, married me, and built things. That's who he was. A builder, not a destroyer. 7 elderly men stood at the back of the church. No uniforms, no ranks. Former gunners from 1944 and 1945. They didn't speak during the service. After the burial, they gathered by the cemetery fence. One pulled out a thermos, to Bulldog. The man who taught us fear shrinks when you move first. They drank Boston coffee, remembered, scattered, carried the lesson until they died too. Hamburg, Germany. Same week. Friedrich Hartmann, 82 years old, read the obituary in the International Herald Tribune. Thomas Sullivan, 75, World War II veteran construction worker, died of heart attack. He sat alone in his study. Greta was a grandmother now, teaching still, passing on the lessons her father had taught her about courage and humility and Americans who changed the world without asking for credit. Fritz poured German coffee, real coffee. Still hard to find, but worth it. Raised the cup. To Thomas Sullivan, the man who won by making his enemies too afraid to fight. The man who taught me that courage defeats discipline. The man who gave me 53 years I shouldn't have had. He drank, set down the cup, opened a drawer. Inside was every letter he'd written to Sullivan over the years. Every one returned or unanswered. Every attempt to say thank you met with silence. But one letter remained, unsent, written in 1967 after the construction site meeting. Never mailed because everything had been said in person. Fritz pulled it out. Read it one last time. Dear Thomas, it began. You saved my life by being braver than I was. You changed warfare by refusing to be predictable. You taught me that initiative matters more than discipline. I have taught hundreds of students your doctrine. They are alive because you had courage. I am alive because you had mercy. My daughter exists because you bluffed instead of rammed. Thank you for everything. Fritz. He folded it carefully. Put it back in the drawer. Some debts couldn't be repaid. Some lessons couldn't be thanked enough. Some men changed the world and died without knowing how far their influence spread. March 6, 2024. 80 years later. Air Force Museum, Dayton, Ohio. Display case in the World War II wing. Sullivan's twin .50 caliber gun barrels from Hell's Fury. Recovered. Restored. Mounted behind glass. Placard beside them, Sergeant Thomas Sullivan pioneered aggressive defense tactics, March 6, 1944. His doctrine saved thousands of lives and fundamentally changed air combat. From South Boston dock worker's son to the man who rewrote the manual. Died 1998. Never sought recognition. Legacy flies in every pilot who learned that initiative defeats reaction. Teenage boy standing with his grandfather, former Air Force, retired colonel. 3 tours, came home. Grandpa, did you know this guy? No, but my instructor did. Said Sullivan taught him that fear is a weapon, that the man who moves first usually survives. That empty guns can win if you make the enemy believe. Did it work? The grandfather gestured around the museum, at the other visitors, at the aircraft, at the history. I'm here, aren't I? My instructor's here. Thousands of us made it home because one tail gunner from South Boston refused to wait for death. The boy looked at the gun barrels. What happened to him? Went home. Worked construction. Died pouring concrete. Never wanted credit. Just wanted to build things after spending 3 years breaking them. The grandfather put his hand on the display case, almost touching the glass, almost touching history. Sometimes the men who change everything don't want monuments. They just want to go home and live quietly. But we remember anyway. We have to. Because March 6, 1944 lasted 4 minutes, and its echo is still flying. They stood in silence, museum closing soon, light fading, but the gun barrels gleamed under display lights, still deadly, still loaded with meaning, still teaching the lesson that Thomas Sullivan never wanted credit for. Fear shrinks when you move first. Courage defeats discipline. Initiative saves lives. Empty guns can win if you believe hard enough.